Okay, so today I want to talk about something that I think is the most important and the most underestimated aspect of this entire war. And once you understand this, everything else, the bombing, the drones, the missiles, the interceptors, all of that becomes almost secondary. Because here's the thing, Iran has a weapon, and this weapon has not been fully fired yet. And the terrifying thing is, it doesn't need to be fired to win the war. The threat alone is enough to collapse the American empire. Okay, and what is this weapon? It is the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, I've heard about the Strait of Hormuz before. I've heard people talk about it. What's new? Why is this so important right now? And I want to answer that. But first, I want to take a step back and explain something that I think most people completely miss when they talk about this war. And that is the difference between two types of power, okay? The first type of power is what I call hard power. Hard power is the kind of power you can see. Bombs, missiles, drones, fighter jets, aircraft carriers. This is the power that America has in abundance. And when most people think about this war, they think about hard power. They think about who has the bigger bomb, who has the better missile, who has the more advanced jet. The second type of power is what I call structural power. And structural power is invisible. You cannot see it. It works quietly, it works slowly. But when it is used, when it is fully activated, it is far more devastating than any bomb. Because structural power does not just destroy a building or a military base. It destroys the entire system that the other side depends on to function. And this is the key insight I want to share with you today. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a piece of geography. It is Iran's structural power weapon. And Iran has been sitting on this weapon for decades. And right now they are using it. Not fully, not yet, but they are using it. And already, it is changing the entire picture of this war. Okay, so let me explain what the Strait of Hormuz actually is and why it matters so much. Because I think a lot of people know the name but don't really understand the numbers. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. And through this small, narrow channel, roughly 20 million barrels of oil pass every single day. Let me put that in perspective. That is approximately 20 to 27% of all the world's oil that is traded by sea. 1/5 to 1/4 of all the world's oil supply passes through a 21-mile gap that is bordered on one side by Iran. And it is not just oil. The Strait of Hormuz also carries approximately 20% of all the world's liquefied natural gas, LNG, most of it coming from Qatar. So if you want to heat your home in Europe or in Japan or South Korea, that gas is passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And there is no alternative route. There is no pipeline that can replace it. There is no other channel that can handle that volume. The Strait of Hormuz is the only way. Now, before this war started, about 3,000 ships per month were passing through the strait. Since Iran declared the strait closed to hostile nations in March 2026, that number has dropped to about 5% of what it was. 5%. That means 95% of shipping traffic has stopped. 95%. Okay, so that is the weapon. Now, I want to explain, using game theory and structural analysis, why this weapon is so powerful that Iran doesn't even need to fully use it to win. Let me give you a thought experiment, okay? Imagine you are playing chess, and imagine that one of your pieces, let's say your rook, is sitting in the corner and hasn't moved. But just because it is there, sitting in that corner, your opponent cannot move freely on that side of the board. Every move they make, they have to look at that rook. They have to account for it. They have to defend against it, even though it hasn't moved. The Strait of Hormuz is Iran's rook. It is sitting there. And every decision that America makes in this war, every calculation Trump makes, every conversation that happens in the Pentagon, every meeting in the Gulf states, all of it happens in the shadow of that rook. All of it happens with one question in the background. What happens if Iran fully closes the strait? And the answer to that question is what I want to walk you through now. Because this answer explains why I have said from the beginning that America cannot win this war, okay? Let's talk about oil first. Right now, oil prices are already elevated because of this war. We are already seeing disruption to global energy markets. But what happens if Iran fully closes the strait? What happens if they go beyond the selective closures they are doing now and genuinely shut off all traffic? Larry Fink, who runs BlackRock, the largest asset management company in the world, the company that manages trillions of dollars of global investments, he went on BBC and said some analysts are saying $200. And what does $200 oil mean? It means economic recession everywhere, not just in America, in Europe, in China, in Japan, in India, in every country that depends on energy to run its economy, which is every country on Earth. Okay, now you might say, well, America has its own oil. America is energy independent now, right? The shale revolution. So why does the Strait of Hormuz matter for America? And this is a really good question. And the answer reveals something important about how the global economy actually works. America does not need Gulf oil for itself. That is true. But here is the thing. The global economy runs on a single price for oil. When oil goes to $200 a barrel in the global market, the price of gasoline in America goes up too. The price of food in America goes up because food production requires energy. The price of everything goes up. You cannot separate the American consumer from the global oil price. It does not work that way. And more importantly, and this is the key point, the American economy is not really an industrial economy anymore. It is a financial economy. America's power in the world today rests on one thing above all else, the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And the US dollar as the reserve currency rests on one thing, the petrodollar system. So let me explain what the petrodollar system is and why the Strait of Hormuz threatens it directly. Okay, this is really important. After World War II, America and Saudi Arabia made a deal. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in US dollars. In exchange, America would protect the Saudi regime militarily. Because Saudi Arabia sells oil in dollars, every country in the world that needs oil, which is every country, needs dollars to buy that oil. This creates permanent global demand for the US dollar. And this permanent global demand means America can print more money than any other country, run bigger deficits than any other country, and still have the world accept its currency. It means America can borrow cheaply. It means America can finance its military, which, as we discussed, is 41% of global military spending, without its economy collapsing. The petrodollar is the financial foundation of American power. Now, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, they collect all these petrodollars from selling oil. And what do they do with them? They recycle them back into the American economy. They invest in American stocks, American bonds, American real estate, American technology companies, American AI data centers. In fact, right now, the entire AI boom, the thing that is driving the American stock market, is being financed significantly by Gulf state petrodollar investment. So here is the chain. Iran threatens the Strait of Hormuz. The strait disruption threatens Gulf state oil exports. Gulf state oil export disruption threatens petrodollar recycling. Petrodollar recycling disruption threatens the AI bubble. The AI bubble bursting threatens the entire American stock market. The American stock market collapse creates economic recession and political crisis inside America. This is the weapon. This is how Iran wins without firing. Not by bombing Washington, not by sending troops to California, but by pulling on one thread of the global financial system until the entire sweater unravels. And we are already seeing this happen. We already saw what happened to the markets when there was even uncertainty about the strait. Imagine what happens when the disruption becomes permanent. Okay, now I want to go deeper, because the Strait of Hormuz is not just one weapon. It is actually three weapons in one. And I want to walk through each one. The first weapon is oil. We have already discussed this, but let me add one more dimension. The GCC countries get 90% of their food through the Strait of Hormuz. Think about that. 90% of food. These are desert countries. They do not grow food. They import almost everything. And the ships that bring that food pass through the strait. So Iran is not just threatening to cut off the oil supply of the GCC. Iran is threatening the food supply of the GCC. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, their populations could face food shortages if this continues long enough. The second weapon is water. Okay, this one most people do not think about at all. And I think it is actually the most powerful. The GCC countries are desert countries. They have almost no natural fresh water. Where does their water come from? It comes from desalination plants, huge industrial facilities that take seawater and turn it into fresh water. And these plants provide 60% of the GCC's water supply. A city like Riyadh, 10 million people, gets most of its water from these plants. Now here's the terrifying thing. These desalination plants are on the coast. They are large, stationary, above-ground targets. And Iran has drones, $50,000 drones. If Iran decides to hit the desalination plants of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which it can do, those cities run out of water in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, a city of 10 million people with no water. Think about what that means. Think about the panic. Think about the immediate political collapse of any government facing that scenario. This is why I have said that Iran is not just threatening the GCC's economy. Iran is threatening the very existence of these nations. And these nations know it. This is why the GCC is terrified. This is why even Saudi Arabia and UAE, who wanted regime change in Iran, are now extremely nervous about escalation, because they know that Iran can make their countries unlivable. The third weapon is the AI economy. We just discussed this, the petrodollar recycling chain that finances the AI bubble. But let me add one more data point. Amazon had a data center in the UAE that was hit during this war. Big technology companies, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, were all looking at the Gulf as the next major hub for AI infrastructure because of cheap and abundant energy. That is now in serious question. The energy is no longer cheap. It is no longer certain. And the big tech companies are now rethinking those investments. which means the Gulf's plan to transform itself into an AI economy, which was the plan to survive the post-oil era, is collapsing at exactly the moment it was supposed to begin. Okay, so now I want to bring this back to the strategic level, because I want to use game theory to explain why this weapon is so difficult for America to counter. When most people think about how to respond to the Strait of Hormuz threat, they say, well, America has the most powerful navy in the world. Can't America just force the strait open? Can't America just escort ships through? Can't America just destroy Iran's missiles and drones on the shore? And the answer is it is not that simple. Let me explain why. Iran's missile bases and drone launch sites are not sitting on the beach. They are spread across hundreds of kilometers of territory. They are inside mountains. They are underground. They are in the Zagros mountain range, in the Alborz Mountains, deep inside Iranian territory. We know this because after weeks of American bombing, with the most advanced air force in the world, Iran's missile and drone capabilities are still fully operational. If anything, they are increasing in effectiveness. So the idea that America can bomb its way to an open strait is not supported by the evidence. And even if America somehow managed to neutralize those sites, even if America somehow opened the strait militarily, what happens then? Iran still has the ability to destroy the oil facilities of the GCC. It still has the ability to hit the desalination plants. It still has the ability to hit the data centers. The problem is not just the narrow channel of water. The problem is the entire geography of vulnerability around it. And there is one more dimension that I think is absolutely crucial, and this is the insurance problem. Even if the strait is technically open, even if ships are allowed to pass, who is going to insure those ships? Ship insurance is calculated on risk. If there is a reasonable probability that your $100 million tanker is going to be hit by a missile or a drone while transiting the strait, your insurance premium becomes astronomical. Your bank will not finance the cargo. Your shipping company will not take the risk. So even a technically open strait becomes a practically closed strait if the threat remains credible. And the threat will remain credible as long as Iran has the capability and the will to act, which it does. This is why I said at the beginning of this lecture that the threat alone is enough. Iran does not need to fire every missile. It does not need to close the strait completely every day. It just needs to maintain a credible threat. And it is doing that, and it will continue to do that. Okay, now let me connect all of this to the broader strategic picture that I have been building in this series of lectures. I have argued that war is fought across 4 dimensions: military, economic, political, and narrative. And I have argued that America is trying to make the economic, political, and narrative dimensions conform to its military strategy, while Iran is using the military to shape the economic, political, and narrative dimensions. The Strait of Hormuz is the perfect example of this. America's military strategy is to bomb Iran into submission, but what Iran is doing with the strait is the opposite. It is using a relatively small amount of military activity to create enormous economic consequences that reshape the political landscape. Every day the strait stays restricted. The economic pressure builds. Every day the economic pressure builds. The political cost of continuing the war in America rises. Every day the political cost rises in America. Trump's ability to sustain this war weakens. This is what I mean when I say Iran is playing a completely different game. America's playing checkers. Move forward, take pieces, win the board. Iran is playing chess. Position, patience, structural pressure, and then the opponent defeats himself. And there is historical precedent for exactly this kind of strategy. The Americans did not lose in Vietnam because Vietnam had better weapons. Vietnam had terrible weapons compared to America. America lost in Vietnam because the cost of continuing the war became politically unsustainable at home. The economic burden, the human cost, the loss of credibility, it all built up until the American political will collapsed. And the troops came home. That is what Iran is engineering right now. Not a military defeat of America on the battlefield, a political and economic collapse of American will from within. And the Strait of Hormuz is the primary engine of that strategy. Okay, now let me address one more thing that I think is important. You might be asking, well, why doesn't Iran just close the strait completely right now if it is such a powerful weapon? Why is it being selective? And this is actually a brilliant example of strategic calibration. Remember what I said in earlier lectures. Iran is not a reckless actor. Iran is a very sophisticated strategic actor that has been planning this for 20 years. And the key concept here is what I call the value of the threat versus the cost of action. If Iran fully closes the strait to everyone, including China, including Russia, including India, then it loses the strategic support of those countries. Remember that China is Iran's biggest oil customer. Chinese ships are currently passing through the strait because Iran is allowing them. This is deliberate. By letting China pass and blocking hostile nations, Iran is saying to China, your economic interests are safe with us. America's military action is what is disrupting global trade, not us. This is extraordinarily sophisticated. Iran is using the strait not just as a weapon against America, but as a tool of political alignment with the non-Western world. And this connects to something else I have said before. The financial masters, the people who actually run the global system, they need stability. They need trade to flow. They need oil to move. And right now, America's military adventure is what is disrupting that stability, not Iran. Iran is offering selective access. America is the one bombing, and in the eyes of the global financial elite, America is becoming the problem, not the solution. This is the deeper game. This is what I mean when I say that Iran is not just fighting America. Iran is engineering the conditions under which the global elite will lose patience with America and begin to support a transition of power away from the American empire. And the Strait of Hormuz is the instrument of that engineering, okay? So let me give you my summary framework, because I want you to understand this in a very clear, structured way. Iran has three structural weapons built into the Strait of Hormuz and the geography around it. The first is oil. It can threaten 20 to 27% of global oil supply. The second is water. It can threaten the desalination plants that supply 60% of GCC fresh water. The third is the petrodollar. By threatening GCC stability, it threatens the recycling of petrodollars into the American financial system, which threatens the AI bubble, which threatens the stock market, which threatens the entire financial foundation of American power. And none of these weapons need to be fully fired. The credible threat of using them is enough to 1. Drive up global oil prices, creating economic pressure on America. 2. Terrify the GCC into wanting an end to the war. 3. Undermine the petrodollar system, weakening the financial foundation of American hegemony. And 4. Demonstrate to the non-Western world that Iran controls the most critical piece of global energy infrastructure. This is the weapon that wins without being fired. And here's my final point, and I want you to think about this carefully. America knows all of this. The Pentagon knows all of this. The Treasury knows all of this. Scott Bessant, the Secretary of the Treasury, knows all of this. That is why they unsanctioned Iranian oil. That is why they are desperately trying to keep oil prices down. That is why they are worried about the markets every single day. America knows it isn't a structural trap. It knows that every day this war continues, the strait remains partially closed, the economic pressure grows, the petrodollar weakens, and the clock ticks down on the political will to continue. America is racing against time. Iran is not racing. Iran is waiting. Iran has been waiting for 20 years for exactly this moment, and it is not going to panic now. So when people ask me, how does this war end? My answer is always the same. It ends when the cost of the strait being restricted becomes more painful than the cost of meeting Iran's conditions. And that moment is getting closer every single week. Okay, so that is my analysis for today. I want you to think about this framework. I want you to apply it to what you are seeing in the news. When you hear about oil prices, think Strait of Hormuz. When you hear about the AI bubble, think petrodollar recycling, Gulf states, Strait of Hormuz. When you hear about Trump looking for an exit, think about the economic pressure building from the strait. Everything is connected, and the connection runs through that 21-mile piece of water that Iran controls. This is not prophecy. This is structural analysis. This is game theory, and this is what predictive history is about, using the patterns of history and the logic of strategic thinking to understand the world that we are living in right now.